The New Zealand On Air presentation, The New Strategy in Action, was recorded live during the 2023 SPADA conference. We apologise for the brief moments of low audio quality during this recording. Some portions of the discussion may have been removed due to copyright or commercial sensitivity.
Let's meet the New Zealand On Air team to tell you about their new strategy. We've got Teresa, we've got Nicole, we've got Cameron, we've got Allanah, and we've got Amie Mills coming in via Zoom.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Cam Harland toku inua. Good morning, everyone. How are we all? I just wanted to start by acknowledging Sandy and Irene. I don't know about you all, but it really... Hello, Irene. It feels like SPADA this year has just been absolutely fantastic, and obviously we are dealing with challenging times. Kia ora. But nevertheless, I sort of feel like the energy over the last couple of days, the attendance levels have been really, really good. So, little round of applause for SPADA. So there's a lot of us up on stage, and we've also got the wonderful Amie Mills. I'm just going to wander around. I know that we've got chairs, but we've got the wonderful Amie Mills joining us remotely from Nio. She has COVID. So I'm going to kick things off, and we're going to try and keep this relatively relaxed, but there is actually a lot to cover. And I'm delighted to be joined by my wonderful colleagues Allanah, Teresa, and Nicole. So we've got a whole bunch of things to talk about, and rather than me just stand here and sort of waffle on for an hour, we sort of thought we'd get some far more interesting people up here to talk. Last year we stood in front of you at this very conference, albeit in Auckland, with a new transitional strategy. It was an answer to the impending merger between TVNZ and RNZ that saw about 45 million of our contestable funds move across to the new entity, and another 40 million of platform funding leaving as well. Now, of course, the new entity was going to be well funded, but it did mean a massive change to the ecosystem that we were looking into. And it did mean for us that we had to pull together a strategy that acknowledged the fact that we would really only have about 60 million left for contestable screen funding, 15 million for scripted and 15 million for factual. We also, as part of that strategy, suggested that caps on digital first and feature film support would be removed. We talked about targeted RFPs for priority audiences being continued, greater emphasis placed on content development and on research and insights. And we would move to 3 screen funding rounds with a cap on production company and platform applications. Some of that was pretty obvious. So with so much less money, the caps were really intended to try and reduce the flow of amazing applications that we were seeing, acknowledging that we simply didn't have enough money to fund them all. We also noted that we were coming out of COVID. We were feeling a little battered and bruised, but we were very grateful for the wonderful support from the government in relation to Puna Kairangi. We talked a lot about that yesterday. 50 million, COVID relief funds, increased music funding, and also 55 million for public interest journalism. And whilst COVID now feels like a distant memory, hey, Amie.
Yeah.
We've rolled into other uncertainty and challenges that included a screen rebate review and then actors and writers' strikes that's placed a significant hold on runaway production and what that means for vital jobs for crew. Not to mention the ongoing challenges of global competitors taking advertising dollars on one side and audiences on the other. And we've also got a new government at some stage about to join us as well. So lots and lots of uncertainty and change. And I just want to acknowledge the difficulties that brings with it. I did this yesterday, but I also want to acknowledge SPADA for their public call for something to be done to encourage streamers to play a bigger role in the local environment. I'm not going to get into the detail of what that looks like. Yes, applause, yes. As Irene briefly said yesterday, there's probably various options available, but I think SPADA's just gone out and said, hey, listen, something needs to be done, and I think that's admirable. And for me, it was interesting to read last week the Australians bemoaning the decrease in investment in local content from the streamers this year, down from 335 million Australian to a paltry 324 million Australian. Wouldn't that be nice? Look, we're aware of a number of questions and concerns from the sector, and we're going to try and answer as many of those as we can today. So we're grateful again to SPADA for sending through some questions from you all. That has helped inform the presentation that we have in front of you. Before we get into that, though, I just want to note, and this is both a compliment to you all and also just a note of how difficult our world is. In the last financial year, we received 427 applications for funding for a total of 180 million. We were able to fund 191 of those applications at 87 million. That's a 44.7% approval rate. In Round Tahi this year, we had 130 scripted and non-fiction applications from 96 producers with a success rate of 33.8%. So, as I say, that's a compliment. There are so many wonderful applications that we're seeing, so many that we would like to fund, many we simply can't. So we absolutely acknowledge the growing level of disappointment in this room and out in the sector. And again, it's I guess why we're hopeful for other options out there. Ultimately, though, our obligation is to the audiences of Aotearoa and as stated in our Act to reflect and develop New Zealand identity and culture by funding programs about New Zealand and New Zealand interests and promoting Māori language, Māori culture and ensuring broadcasts for women, children, youth, persons with disabilities and minorities in the community, including ethnic minorities, with an expectation of content that will captivate and entertain. Kia ora. Looking ahead, the funding strategy we released in February this year will continue. It acknowledges an ongoing and growing need for insights and data to inform our funding strategies. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. I think all of the funding agencies are acknowledging that is a really fundamental part of our mahi. It's also really delightful to note that MCH is taking on a bigger macro level role in this space as well. So the idea that we have big measures across the whole of the arts and culture sector that say this is the value that you get from investing in this stuff. And I think more important now than ever. So hats off to MCH for their work on that too. We also acknowledge the need for uplifting and developing content creators. We talked briefly about that yesterday, especially where skills gaps exist. And the need to ensure content can be found by audiences, but also the importance of focusing as much pūtea as possible on the creation of content for audiences. So as I said yesterday, our new strategy suggests that there's a bunch of new things that we need to do, and absolutely there is, but our commitment is to spend by far and away the majority of our money on content. We also need to try and work with you all to lift the availability of funds for projects or somehow reduce the number of applications because the level of declines is just not good for anyone. Just also want to acknowledge the changes to the rebate. They definitely provide an opportunity. Again, talked about that yesterday. But you would have seen recent examples of projects funded where we've taken a first-in approach on the assumption that this will provide producers with a greater opportunity to secure third-party investment, which in turn will allow them to access the rebate. The most recent scripted round, which I did briefly touch on yesterday, we invested 10.4 million in 4 projects with a combined total of 36 million. This compares to previous years where we might have invested sort of 12 to 13 mil on maybe 2 projects. So the rebate change could really be a game changer for us. More projects, more ambition, more work, more jobs, just kind of more. Good. But also want to acknowledge this is new for us. We're seeking to take a prudent approach on this. All the funding offers that we put out are time-bound for 6 months, which assumes that producers have already come away along that road to having discussions with financiers, and does allow for the return of funds back into our financial year should deals not be forthcoming. We took that position based on feedback from producers that are well-equipped and are used to accessing the rebate. We will continue to monitor to this, and of course, we're also open to providing, as I just said to Harriet, Hello. We are also open to providing gap funding where projects have already found third-party finance. So bear with us. We do think it's a game changer, but it is new for us. So let's do as much as we can in that space. So that's just about me. As I said before, we've got a few speakers here today. We've got the wonderful Amie, who's going to be next up, as I say, beaming in from NIO. She's going to talk a fair bit more on the detail of our funding strategy and drill into where the pūtea has been allocated over the last few years. The wonderful Allanah, quietest I've seen you in a little while. The quietest I've seen you in a while. You wait. Allanah's going to be taking us through our thinking and planning for research and insights before we introduce the wonderful T to briefly talk about some of the wonderful things we've been doing in the sync licensing space. Now, be nice to T. She's from the music industry. She's here to try and help you. Okay? Yeah. And then we've got the amazing Nicole, who's going to speak about our exciting new Pacifica media initiative coming out of our 10 mil. Be nice to Nicole as well, because she's awesome and she'll come get you. So before I hand over to Amie, though, I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of other quick important matters that we're not going to go into too much depth on today. Firstly, the work that the lovely Raywin Rash, who's just sitting in the front row there quietly. Raywin was our former head of journalism and has come into a new role as head of partnerships for us. She's leading a bunch of work in relation to our organisational rotaki and our te tiriti strategy. This is critical work for us, and I do acknowledge it's been long awaited, but we want to do it properly, we want to do it meaningfully, and we want to do it deeply. So we're taking our board through a draft strategy on that next week and hope to provide further updates early in the new year. Somewhat aligned to that is also the refinement or reassessment of our assessment process to ensure that they are fit for purpose and as clear and transparent as possible. The wonderful Kay Elmers has been leading this work for us. Again, we're close to putting something out for the sector for further consultation soon. And this obviously aligns with the mahi-tahi work that we talked about yesterday, which is kind of that endeavour of not only trying to find efficiencies, but just being better at stuff. So that's me. Thank you for your patience. With all the best luck in the world, tech is going to work, and we are going to throw to Amie.
Kia ora, Cam. Can you hear me all right?
Kia ora, yep.
Right. Tēnā rā tātou katoa, e mihi ana ki te haukainga o te whanganui atara, ki te atiawa taranaki whānui me Ngāti Toa Rangatira. Ko Amie Mills taku ingoa, he Pākehā ahau, ngō ko te rani ngō ingarani oku tipuna, ko ahau te tumuaki o ngā tāke pūtea ki irirangi te motu. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Firstly, just huge thanks to Ness and Sandy for the last minute COVID debacle. So sorry for adding additional stress to all your plans, and very much appreciate you being able to beam me in. Really hoping I'm not like a giant head on that huge screen in that room. But yes, so I'm going to use the time I've got to, as Cam said, lift the hood up on the funding strategy. We got great pātai from the sector with SPADA's call out, with the key questions really being how's the new strategy bedding in, what's kind of materially different from what you've been doing before, and critically, where's the pūtea going? So that's sort of what I'm going to dive into today. Bear with me, there we go. So yeah, so as Cam said, we're 5 months into the new strat, which is the big sort of giant blue circle on the right-hand side of the screen. And it was released in February, but didn't come into action until July, beginning of the financial year. And so I think before I just dive into talking allocations, and there's a few graphs, apologies, but what I thought might be helpful is that we just take a moment, because it does feel a bit like a time warp this sort of time last year, where we were, just to kind of, how did we get to here in terms of the new strategy. So the previous strategy, which is the small triangle you can see on the bottom left of the screen, that's the New Zealand Media Fund. So it was set up in 2017, and at the time it was really trying to signify the growth in digital platforms, and it had been a shift away, kind of broadly speaking, from larger pots of linear funding to acknowledging the growth of digital platforms, and it went to what was called the platform agnostic model, and the 4 circles sitting within that triangle reflect what's the sort of the fundamental of that strategy, which was funding factual content, scripted content, platforms content, and music. So 2020, it was 3 years into the New Zealand Media Fund, and we undertook an independent review of the strategy. So we had an independent media consultant, Hal Crawford, who interviewed a whole swathe of producers and platforms and sector partners, and dug deep into all our strategy documents and as much data as he could get his hands on to kind of look at, is the strategy delivering to its stated aims? And we got a ton of really useful, very thoughtful kind of recommendations that came out of that report, which we were slowly starting to implement. And then, as Cam noted, the merger kind of emerged, and we were suddenly facing this future of, well, actually, if 60% of our baseline funding moves across to the new entity, we're going to be a very different functioning funding agency, and what will that need to look like? But so the merger obviously didn't happen, but I think what it meant for us was that it was a kind of catalyst to really look at the strategy rather than kind of tutu around the edges of it and tinker with it. It was a kind of reimagining of where are we at the moment, the preceding 3 to 4 years of what audiences are doing, where's the sector at. It kind of allowed us to take a much bigger look at what the strategy is and was doing. And I won't spend a lot of time talking through it. For those that aren't familiar with it, there's a strategy document on our website that takes you through a ton of detail around it. But just at a kind of high level, what the shift meant was that we went from, I think, what the New Zealand Media Fund was, which was kind of, generally speaking, almost exclusively focused on content production only, to the new strategy, which has a more holistic look at what's our impact across the sector. And actually, so as Cam said, it's looking at the importance of insights and research tailored to our specific priority audiences, then looking at things like capability and skills gaps across the sector, and where can we have high impact in terms of supporting, lifting those outcomes. And then, as Cam mentioned, just the lion's share being actually the funding of the content itself. And then increasingly this final quadrant called discoverability, which is actually considering what does it mean to be looking at how we might support the marketing and promotion of content to find audiences. And at the moment, that's really the purview of what we've been looking at in the tamariki children's space. So I think a good example of where you can see the new strategy coming into play is for the youth initiative that we're rolling out in round toru, which is the final funding round of the financial year that happens early next year. Because late last year we released qual and quant research that sort of dove deeply into that 15 to 24 age group. What are their media consumption behaviours? What are they doing? Out of that, we sat with that research, and then we looked at, okay, how do we tailor our funding strategies and our policies to meet that research? And then we've put the RFP out in round toru around funding the creation of it, and included discoverability. So Allanah will talk us through that kind of how the research is coming into play for us more, and T is going to actually give us another example of the strategy coming to life, where we had research looking into music and sync licensing and local production, and we've kind of come up with, I think, a really powerful initiative out the back of that will hopefully start to bed in moving forward. So it's just to kind of actually bring the strategy to life with a couple of examples as well. And then in terms of the actual breakdown, so we've had lots of comments from producers and platforms, and I would say concerns raised about saying, if you're looking at these new focus areas, what does that mean, particularly in terms of funding content production, especially considering that we're in, deeply fiscally constrained times? Like, what does that mean? And so it did feel like, well, it would be helpful to actually put the allocations out, because when you divide a circle 4 ways, it looks like everything's quartered evenly, and you can see from those numbers on screen that we're actually taking, I think, quite a measured and conservative approach to how we're doing these new focus areas. And as Cam said, still, absolutely laser focused on supporting the content production piece. So just briefly, if you look at research and data, that's about $1 million. So, sorry, I should add the 174 million in the circle. That's the quantum of the funding that goes against the investment strategy. So 1 million of that goes towards insights and research, which has been upweighted from years past. And then about 1.5 million, so again, close to kind of 1% of it is going on what we're calling capability. And that actually breaks down into two areas. So that includes the actual funding of content development, which I'll talk a little bit about shortly. And it includes a kind of 500,000 or a bit over that looks at kind of the industry and skills training, especially where we can see kind of equity and systemic issues at play, like where can some money go to kind of lift those outcomes. And then the bottom quadrant of the circle is the majority of what we do. So 83.5 million of that 174 is for the funding of scripted, non-fiction and music content. Scripted and non-fiction being roughly split 50-50 across a total pot of 77.5 million this year. And music, which has been upweighted in the last couple of years, is sitting at about 6 million. And then interestingly, I think, given that RNZ's had its boost to baseline funding, I think for the first time, the overall quantum of the platform's funding is actually kind of increased above the content creation funding itself. So in the discoverability pot of the strategy, we've got about 88 million, and 86 of that goes towards our funded platforms. And then you can see a small amount goes towards the support of great events like this one, and industry awards and conferences. And then in terms of the actual allocation for paid marketing and promotion, it's sitting at around 2 million. So only about 1% is actually going towards us kind of trialing in that space, especially around children's and youth content. So yeah, I think the thing we'd just say is that, like every strategy, we're going to be reviewing it internally. We'll do it at the end of every financial year. We're likely to be iterating and tweaking those allocations. And I think we're also just aware that we want to be talking to the sector the whole time as well as we're going through that and sort of sharing what's working and what's not. And just lastly, to add that the $10 million one-off funding, which Cam's going to talk about later in the preso, hasn't been incorporated in this because it's only one-off funding. So then looking at the next slide, if I can get to it, we've got non-fiction funding. So the next couple of slides, these were direct questions from the sector, which was saying, how is the money being allocated, and particularly how is the money being allocated across different budget levels? I think it's fair to say that we've had both pushback and praise from producers around opening up the levels of funding across the core streams of non-fiction funding, scripted funding, development and children's. And I think what we had historically with the New Zealand Media Fund is you had, or pre the New Zealand Media Fund, I should add, is you had high-level budgets usually geared towards linear only, and then pre the NZMF, I think it was the Digital Media Fund that was sort of ring-fence PUSIA for small-scale digital projects only. So a lot of this shift in terms of different budget levels has been in direct response to kind of the changing audiences and the growth of digital platforms we've seen, but it has also been in response to producers talking a lot about the lack of stepped progression pathways as a creator, especially if you're coming in as an emerging creator, the ability to work on something smaller scale, de-risked, step into a larger scale production, and then ultimately, ideally get onto those larger scale ones as well. So if we look at the graph, if I just give a translation of the colorways, because I know that little code will be hard to read, you've got the dark blue bar, which is looking at projects that are the lower tier. So those are 500K or under. The grey bars are the projects that sit, and this is in the non-fiction space. So this is projects, the grey bar, that sit between 500K and $1 million. And then the lighter blue bar is projects that sit at the kind of $1 million and over level. And I should also say all these graphs are taking into account data from the last 3 full financial years. So we haven't included this financial year because we're only partway through it, so it makes the numbers a bit skewy. But what you can see, obviously, is that those lighter blue bars, that kind of 1 million and above projects, they are declining. And I think that can be attributable to what we're seeing in terms of the declining linear environment and the kind of prioritization of wanting to see projects that are going out into digital platforms for audiences. But what I just would add to that is that I think when we launched this new strategy earlier in the year, we removed the 500K cap that was in place for digital-only projects. So I think what we're quite interested in seeing as we kind of move forward is what the future holds for those larger scale projects, especially in the non-fiction space, that'll be digital first, to work first and foremost for digital, and might secondly work on linear, and what they look like. And then the only other thing I'd add on this slide is just, like any data, when you start to dig into it, it's just worth noting that the quantum of funding against the 2020 to 21 year is larger overall, because that was a year we got a bumper one-off funding from government. We also had COVID relief funding and platform subsidy funding in play, so that's why that's larger than the other years. And then if we turn to scripted, so same colorways apply. You've got Tier 3 projects, which is your projects $1 million or under. And then the Tier 2 projects are the grey bars. They sit between a 1 mil to 3 mil bracket. And then the light blue line is the Tier 1 projects, which are kind of total budgets of $3 million or more. And that little star, that was the one-off funding again. And that meant we got an additional $6 million drama up that year, which was Panthers from memory. So that's why that year was a real bumper year. If you look at those dark blue bars, the Tier 3, the ones under $1 million, it's remained reasonably steady over the past few years, and that will remain the case, I think, because what we're trying to recognise is the importance of having pathways for emerging creators coming in, but absolutely we get it that you have to be balancing that against the ability to fund the larger scale projects, which arguably offer more skills development and certainly offer more employment opportunities across the sector. But a reminder that the kind of Tier 3 level, especially in the last few years, it's unearthed projects and voices coming through like Inky Pinky Ponky, like Homebound 3.0, the first season, like Kid Sister, the first season, Self-Help, Hui Hoppers. So, it's critical to still be offering those opportunities for the green shoots projects to come through. And then if you look at the Tier 2 projects, so that's the grey bars, those are the $1 to $3 million projects. They've also gone up and down across the years, but they have remained a strong focus for us. And I think, we've had lots of conversations with the sector, and we recognise that the projects at that level are really hard as well. So Tier 2 is not about trying to lowball budgets or undercook budgets. It's actually about offering the opportunity for projects to come in, and then once they can find their audiences and find their ambition, then the idea would be that they can scale up. And, as Cam mentioned, now that the rebate's in play, I think that tier becomes even more important for creating the pathways for creators to cut their teeth on projects and then kind of move up and be able to access rebate scale projects is the ideal. And, similar to my note around Tier 3, it's just a reminder that the Tier 2 funding has brought through these types of voices and these types of projects, a lot of ones that have managed to scale up. And a significant number of these have actually gone on to get international distribution deals as well for content. So you can sort of see the value and importance of them. And then if we look at development funding, we've split that into two buckets. So the grey bucket is projects accessing 25K or under each, and the blue bar is the ones that are coming in accessing more than 25K, usually no more than, say, a maximum of 50K per project. And this is definitely an area where we've been listening really closely to the sector. And I think when I started at NZ On Air in 2018, I think we roughly allocated about 400K per annum on development funding, which increased, I think, to about 600K. And then the last couple of years, it's sat about the $1 million mark per annum, which I think for us feels kind of right for now, because we're really conscious about what that creates in terms of demand and supply issues. But again, I think the rebate changes the sort of paradigm again, because you want to be having a very healthy pipeline to be able to potentially service that opportunity as well. So So you can sort of see the increase in the blue bar kind of as a reflection of that sort of strategic shift on our part. And just noting with the little star there that we actually did invest more than $1 million just in last financial year, very tactically to try and support the ambitions of children's projects specifically that were hoping to access the rebate, because we had seen with the likes of Darwin and Newts and Kitty and Lou just how unbelievably hard it is to try and get those projects into market, find co-production partners if you don't have access to that development putia up front. So a small number, so what we sort of did last financial year is we said at the very beginning of the financial year, a small number of projects could come in for meaningful development putia, and then the idea was sort of bookending it, that at the end of the financial year last year, you could come in for some first and provisional funding, meaning that then producers in theory would have quite a nice package. If their development deliverables were in a good place, they'd have some meaningful domestic market putia with some good deliverables to kind of go and sell their wares internationally. But as Cam mentioned, and as I'll touch on in a slide briefly on the rebate, if that money needed to, that it wasn't able to get drum up market interest, that money would flow back into the contestable funding pot, which segues actually nicely into the children's funding itself. And that is, so the bars here, you've got the dark blue bars under 500K, the grey bars 500K to $1 million, and the light blue bar is projects of $1 million or over. And, year on year, historically, we've had about 14 million for children's content that we've allocated. Last year, we actually bumped that up quite specifically, as I just mentioned, to try and meet those rebate ambitions. And I think just because we'd also been looking across the ditch and just seen how successfully ABC had been doing that with the likes of Bluey. So that was the idea, is that there would be first in funding from us, but if the producers with a set deadline they had with that money attached, if they can't then drum up international market interest, that money comes back into the pot. So we're sort of experimenting to see whether or not that yields any strong outcomes, and if not, that we might shift away from that strategy moving forward. So just briefly on the rebate, because Cam did cover this up top, but children's, the opportunity here is that the rebate has been broadened to go beyond what we've been able to be funding alongside, which was only animation and children's drama in the past, to now, broadly speaking, non-fiction and broader scripted funding. And so for children's, it's been 7.7 million allocated in last financial year against 4 projects, for a total combined budget of 30.9 million. And those producers have until end of Jan to try and drum up market interest, ideally. And if not, as I mentioned, that money then flows back into this financial year. And then in terms of drama, we funded 4 projects. Cam ran you through these numbers. So, but the deadline for these ones is March 2024. I think that the reality is we're learning as we go with this, and I think we'd hope to try and pull together a rōpū of children's and drama producers pre-Christmas to kind of talk about how it was working. I think what we'll end up doing is try and do it after March, because then we'll actually have a line of sight of what worked, what projects were picked up, were extensions granted, and if so, on what basis. And also, was it wise to kind of be leaning into first in financing, the theory being that then you've got meaningful money going into market to kind of shop the projects, but has that actually meant that's just tied up a lot of money, and actually we're better to take a more prudent approach and try and be last and get financing for projects? So those are the conversations I think we'll be having with the sector kind of early next year, to then inform how we move into it through next financial year. And then lastly, before I hand across to Allanah, and thank you for bearing with me, because I know that those graphs are dense, but we did have a lot of those specific questions from the sector, and so I'd kind of built the whakaaro around wanting to actually address those questions. These 2 came up a couple of times and they felt very relevant, so I wanted to address them specifically. The first one asking, do we think we have the balance right in terms of funding for new and emerging producers and platforms versus more established production companies and networks? And then the second one asking about whether or not we sort of believe it's part of our remit to actually be responsible in terms of reacting to the health of the sector. And we had a lot of conversations about this internally, because I think both questions are really fascinating, and I don't think there's a straight answer on either, because I think it kind of depends on the viewpoint of who's asking the question, and also the kind of intricacies, particularly around the context of emerging and established players and platforms, and the kind of interplay of funding between those. So, and I guess what I mean by that is that I think people's determinants of what a healthy sector looks like actually differs. And for us, it's a balance of ensuring that we have created enough opportunity in the way that the funding is distributed, that our growing and sustainable production companies look and feel like Aotearoa New Zealand, and that the projects coming through reflect that as well. And I think we acknowledge that there's a lot of opportunity that lies in established players supporting the emerging voices coming through. So we've seen that to great effect with things like the partnership between like Kid Sister, the partnership between Greenstone and Simon Nathan, and actually a huge number of those examples are out in the space. We know that with SPP, Screen Time, Warner's, Great Southern, you're all in that space, and we recognise there's a real opportunity there, I think, in terms of those larger scale scripted and non-fiction projects, in terms of the scaffolding that can be applied. And then the other point I think I'd make around the sort of health of the sector and supporting the local production sector is that our mandate in legislation is different still to the other funding agencies, and it is focused on audiences. So I think the balance we're always trying to juggle, or the tension we're juggling, is that we're trying to make sure that the funding's not spread so thinly or so skewed that you're kind of distorting the health and viability of the sector. But at the same time, you're really focused on audience outcomes and supporting projects for those priority audiences that we're mandated to serve. But, as you can see from what we've talked through, we are taking a flexible approach to our remit, because we totally acknowledge that, you're not delivering content in a vacuum. And so the sort of emphasis on developing creative talent, ensuring content can be found, and outweighting research is all part of that. And it does inform our mahi. And then last slide, and I promise it's the last graph, is that I guess it just felt like it's actually important to acknowledge that over the past 10 years, 50% of our funding consistently has gone to a group of 10 production companies, and the remaining 50% is spread across other independent production players. So, I think we feel like that balance is relatively fair. And then the other point I'd make around the emerging platforms partai is that, again, I think the stats bear out that we're taking a conservative approach to this, where, for example, in round tahi, the sort of biggest funding round of the financial year, 74% of that scripted and non-fiction funding went to the network. So where we are talking about funding emerging platforms or social media, I think we're taking a really kind of clear research-driven approach to it. And so we're saying where we can see that the audiences are, that's where we're looking at those things. We're certainly not taking a wholesale approach to moving towards them. And absolutely the majority of our funding is still going to the major networks. So yeah, I think that was just to say from our vantage point, I sort of think we feel like that balance is fair. And that's me, and I'll hand back to Allanah.
Kia ora e hoa, get better. Thank you so much for doing that, Amie. Thanking her for getting out of her sick bed for this.
Thanks, team.
She is a star. Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Allanah Kalafatelis, Takawingawa, kei tumuaki whakawhiti kōrero me te rangahau, ki Irirangi te motu. So I have the weird hybrid role of comms and research at NZ On Air, but it works for me. So I'm just going to really rattle through this because we're running a bit short of time, and my colleagues here on the stage, Nicole and Teresa, have some really important stuff to share with you too. So I'll spare you too much of the detail here. Our research plan is underpinned largely on understanding the audiences, what they're consuming, where and why, and what we need to be doing to create great local content to get in front of them to enjoy. And integral to that, of course, is where the audience is, which I'm sure most of you will be familiar with. And that's become an annual treat for the geeks. And in the past couple of years, we've also started to do some deep dives into particular audiences. And as Amie referenced, we did one last year into the youth audience. And for the first time, we trialled an approach where we did quant and qual alongside each other. And that was really rich. And we learned a lot from it, and as you saw, that informed our strategy. So that's what we're all about, making sure the strategy is underpinned by real experience and real insights. So we'll be doing more of that. The next one out of the blocks we want to do is a deep dive into Māori audiences, and I hope to partner with Te Mangai Pāho on this, and I think actually NZFC are interested too, is that right? So yeah, it would be great if it was cross-sector, because I think the richness of insights there will be awesome. In addition to that, we will be doing another round of children's media use research in the 24-25 financial year. And that's been done to date every 5 years. Perhaps we could. That one's a really expensive one, because trying to get in front of kids is quite expensive. You've got to be in the room with them, with parents. Anyway, just to say, I think there's a lot more scope for us to be doing more between the three agencies together, and the CEs referred to this yesterday. And yeah, watch that space, because it's where we get rich data for the whole of the sector. Speaking of which, we're also keen to explore the idea of doing some focus groups, specifically in relation to NZ On Air funded content, as a way of learning more about what the audiences enjoy. And the other area is actually two other areas to mention quickly. Diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI, needs to very much be underpinned by good information about the sector. We do our own diversity reports annually at the moment, and these are just looking at above-the-line positions on funded content. And those reports have been really instrumental in driving some of our capability initiatives. But we can do more, and we need to understand more about our sector. So we'd really love to work alongside Te Mangai Pāho and New Zealand Film Commission to develop a way of gathering much richer data about our workforce. And of course, that then will mean that we can inform how we get a more inclusive workforce overall, which will be to the benefit of everybody and our audiences in particular. The last thing to mention is, the holy grail is to be able to develop measures, ways of measuring cultural impact, because that's what we're really here for, and it's a really hard one, and there is work going on to try to nail that. I think Te Mangai Pāho is the closest on this, so big ups to them, and we're taking a bit of a leaf out of their book on that note. We've inserted a new question into the Nielsen CMI this year for the first time that asks respondents about whether they're seeing content that represents them on screen, and that can be cut and diced by ethnicity, age, region, blah, 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 anything you want really, except disability. Unfortunately, the CMI does not survey on disability, and we're trying to influence them to change that. Anyway, that's enough from me, because, as I say, we have also the wonderful tea, so I'm handing over to tea.
Kia ora koutou, malo lele, ko Teresa Patterson toka ingoa. I am Teresa Patterson. I'm the head of music at Irarangi Te Moto. So just following on from research, last year we published a sync licensing report that was conducted by composer and musician, but also he had worked at Native Tongue as a publisher, Paul McLeany. There was a recommendation within that report that there should be more alignment between the screen and music departments. And interestingly enough, that was also a recommendation in the recent music funding review that we've published. But also there was a recommendation for NZ On Air to engage a music licensing specialist to review budgets at the proposal stage. Off we go, yep. So as a result of this, last year we contracted an award-winning music supervisor, Amie Raymer. Her CV's super impressive. She's worked on great American productions like Weeds and 6 Feet Under, and because she splits her time between LA and New Zealand, she has worked recently on productions like Red, White and Brass and Baby Done. So Amie met with 2 of our NZ On Air funded dramas in their teams, like the producer, the director and writers, and did a forensic review of what music was actually required in each episode and went through it like scene by scene. And then she submitted a recommendation on what the music budget should actually be, based on whether the music would be licensed or composed, or if it's like a newly created song. And it was a really interesting exercise because the difference was quite vast from the music budget that was submitted, like up to $200,000. And $200,000. And there's probably a whole lot of reasons for that, which I won't go into today because I've only got 5 minutes to do this bit. But we approved the additional music budget with the caveats that the music budget had to be ring-fenced and it couldn't be eroded, and that 80% of the music budget was to be Aotearoa artists. And having this proper music budget meant that the productions could employ a music supervisor, they could properly pay musicians, which just, makes my heart sing, and they could probably pay the composer. And this mahi then, thanks to Amie Mills and the wonderful screen team, was offered out in the recent special scripted round, but unfortunately there wasn't any uptake. And again, there's probably a few reasons around this, because it was an offer to have an additional music budget up to $200,000. So we do want to continue this mahi, but there's probably a little bit of internal discussion to happen as to why there wasn't this uptake, and probably some external education around music supervision and music budgets. So, and also, just being ex-record company, I just feel that there's some great cross-promotional opportunities when you've got an amazing lot of music in a production. There can be a lead single that can help promote, there can be, a soundtrack. So, yeah, it's something that I'm really, really stoked that we've started doing and will continue.
Sadly, we're going to jump the clip, I know.
Lame.
Hey, shut up in the cheap seats. Go back to sleep. I just wanted to acknowledge how passionate we are about this part of the mahi. I think that the one other thing to say is that a fantastic track just makes your show better. And we had Grant Baker up here yesterday. I'm sort of from that world as well. Like, post is often the bit that's squeezed, but it's actually the bit where the magic happens. So if I could put a plug out to anyone, it's like, don't scrimp on this stuff because it's worth it. And of course, we're prepared to put some money into it, so you don't even need to. So yes, thank you, T. Just quickly, because we are running out of time, we have been lucky enough, and thank you to our MCH colleagues for their amazing advocacy through the process of winding back the merger and sort of bedding down where funding was going to go. We managed to receive a $10 million one-off boost last year. Yay. Unfortunately, it is only one-off. We were hopeful that it might not be. You never know, but nevertheless, basically what we've got on the slide there is pulled directly from the ministry in relation to what the expectation was for that 10 mil. So it's funds to support the creation of innovative content. Well, everything that we fund is innovative content, really, but the idea is it'll be used to deliver trusted public media, news, information, entertainment through cross-sector collaboration, and its aim will be to reach groups who are currently underrepresented across the media system: Māori, Pacifica, Asian, rangatahi and children. So one of the things we looked at was high impact and areas that would otherwise areas that we would have otherwise loved to be funding but couldn't. as you can see up there, we've put 50% of the one-off funding towards our big youth initiative, which Amie touched on, and that's running around Toru. In large part, this decision was driven by how this group is one of the most difficult to reach, as we know from our insights and research, and is also a powerful intersectional cohort because we know that Māori and Pasifika youth are key audiences we want to reach. So this is a big part of our focus. Alongside our intention to deliver Te Rangatahi in the Youth Fund and our 8 million co-fund with Te Mangai Pāhu that we talked about yesterday, and the baseline mahi, obviously, that we're doing, and the work that we're doing in relation to our Te Rautaki Māori and our Te Tiriti strategy, we're also committing to 2 million to go to Māori-owned production companies. We've also taken the opportunity to develop a fantastic Pacific media partnership, which my wonderful colleague Nicole is about to take you through.
Cool, now.
Yeah, go.
All right. Go! Not much time left. Whakalawhalahi atu ki mo tolosi, whakamua, whakaue ki hiki, kua mea ki a tau tolosi ki whelewea he pungi nei, ko e hakuhingoa ko Nicole Rex, hauau he maanga ko One Pata, Avasele, nofuau I Wellingtoni, whakaue, whakalawhalahi atu. Kia ora koutou, I mihi ana ki te haukainga o te whanganui atara, a ngā te toa, te ate awa, ngā te rau kawa. Tēnā koutou rangatira mā. Ko loto sea oku hapu, no niue au, he kai tohu pūtea au e mahi ana o te ererangi te motu. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. What's up, everybody? My name is Nick and I don't have time. So I'm going to flip the script here. Sorry, Allanah and Cam, please don't fire me. I'm not going to do my bit that I said I was going to do. I'm going to do something different. So first of all, we've been talking about New Zealand On Air, but the thing that makes New Zealand On Air are our people. So I'm going to ask my peeps to stand up, please, and the kids' table, hippie and waving. Wave it. Come on, stand up, Etsu, please, 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 please. Yes. Yay. These are the people at New Zealand On Air that make everything possible. And I tell you what, when I was at SPADA, probably the last time I was at SPADA a few years ago, we only had like 18, 19 people in our organisation, and now we have all these wonderful people. Hepiri and Waipinga at the back there. So yeah, if you have any funding questions, ask them, okay? Also, I am going to flip the script a bit. I know I don't have much time, but, can we go back to the other slide? Because I'm going to, please. Which other slide?
There's
the introducing part slide, please. So other than the people, I had a hand in people at New Zealand On Air. I also had a hand in creating this awesome Pasifika initiative. And I wanted to do this. I wanted to say, SPADA 2023, I am SPADA, introducing the Aotearoa New Zealand Pacific Regional Media Fund. Thank you. Man, everyone that knows Islanders, we have to make a big deal of this, you know. 2 million's a lot of money. And I tell you what, you can go to the other slide now. But I'll tell you what, when I told the partner, our agency partner that we're teaming up with about this on the phone, she cried. She was like straight crying. I was like, are you crying, Tosh? And she's like, no, you're crying. I'm like, yeah, I'm crying because you're crying now. So this is like a big deal for our Pasifika people, right? So I'll go quickly, sorry guys, because I know you guys have some questions and we really value your questions, so I'll go fast. So this is a cross-agency partnership with Pasifika TV. 2 EOIs, expressions of interest, went out this week, so on Wednesday, to Aotearoa-based Pasifika producers and 1 out to Pacific-based producers, broadcasters. So what we're doing is we're seeking 10 interested parties from Aotearoa and in the Pacific to co-produce original Pasifika screen content. So we're going to have a 2-day workshop in Auckland. The broadcasters are going to
the producers, broadcasters will come over for that. They'll work on ideas and the application. We're looking at funding up to 6 projects, $250K each, with an additional $60K for music composition and licensing, because we know how talented our Pasifika people are, so got to put that music in there, man. And thank you so much, T, for suggesting that. The primary platform will be Pasifika TV. It's going to be in a mix of English and Pasifika languages. And we want to do that because, you know, as Pasifika people here today, I'm first generation, but there's lots of third, fourth generation here in Aotearoa, and it'll be nice to go back. And if you don't know your language, you can learn your language, and we'll have that in the content too, which is awesome. And we encourage the projects to be shot in the islands. No, it's not a holiday to go to the islands. You'll be working hard. Lots to do there, lots to do. And we have 2 awesome exec producers to oversee the projects, Stallone Vaiaonga Iawasa for scripted and Stephen Stalin for non-fiction. Okay, quickly, one more bit, I promise. So why is this kaupapa so important? Well, the professional development for both Pasifika producers here and in the islands helps to build strong Moana storytellers. Now, this kaupapa aligns perfectly with the Moana strategy designed by Pasifika in the industry here in Aotearoa. Pasifika audiences are served inspiration through storytelling that is by, for, and about Pasifika. So please, guys, tell all your Pasifika creative mates, check out the New Zealand On Air website under funding for more information. Thank you so much. Whakauelahi.
Isn't she amazing? Completely amazing. And you can kind of tell she worked in radio because she just nailed that time. And for my part, I really want to apologise because it's a really, really great and important part of our mahi, and it shouldn't have been left to the end and be that rushed. But thank you all. Sorry we ran so tight. As you can see, we've got a lot that we're doing in service to you all. Have a good morning.